and we're hoping people enjoy it. Eric, you there?
Yes,
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. We're adjusting the audio so that our
Yeah.
eardrums don't get blown out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. So you had a question for us.
Yeah, first I wanted to apologize for
We just lost audio
Martin
in here in the booth.
and Russell. Can you hear me?
Oddly enough, I can hear you through the speaker in the other room. Ooh, there we
Whoa.
go. All right, now we have audio back.
Yikes.
So there's those technical problems. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah.
Everything's fixed now and will work perfectly for the rest of the show. I decree it.
So I wanted to apologize to Martin and Russell because I called in last week, but I had to go do something. Sorry for making them wait.
Oh, that's fine.
So my question was about morality, and the first thing I wanted to say is that I watched a video with you and Anti-Citizen X about essentialism,
Okay.
and you guys were I basically agree with you that words are arbitrary and that like the way we assign references to what we're talking about is
Sure.
up to us.
Words have usage. They don't have intrinsic meaning. We construct them, we use them, and they are labels that are pointers to a concept. And as long as you and I are using the same word in the same way, we're able to communicate. And as soon as that's not true, communication starts to break down.
Yes, and I feel the same way about it. So,
Then you're right.
So before we even start talking about this, I wanted to make sure we like had our definitions about right and wrong down. So generally when I say things like right and moral, I generally mean intending to promote well-being and happiness and minimizing suffering and stuff like that. I don't know what you guys use.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I'm on board with that. I mean, when Sam Harris wrote The Moral Landscape, he's basically arguing for morality as synonymous with well-being. And one of the first challenges that people offer is that well-being is itself not well-defined. And that's true. But there's plenty of things that aren't particularly precisely defined to a point of clarity that are still useful. And what we tend to do is just go ahead and use the terms and have the conversation until we get to a point where, hey, wait a minute, one of us has a slightly different understanding or usage here, and then we kind of backtrack to figure out what that is.
Yeah, and I generally think the same thing. So when I use the opposite, when I use like wrong and immoral, I generally mean intending to cause unnecessary suffering, things like that. So that's what I wanted to get out of the way first before I delved into my post, because I had basically said that it isn't necessary that slavery or murder are wrong given those specific definitions, and so the example I wanted to use was I could conceive of a scenario in which no suffering happens, but a murder happens, for example.
Sure. And so I'm a little. So one of the things that's going to be a problem is when you start talking about conceive of a scenario.
Yes.
Because while I would have taken issue with your claim that slavery isn't necessarily wrong, by saying that what I advocate for is situational ethics, that you evaluate each situation on its own. But there are a number of situations that are so similar that we kind of co-opt this and run with our gut on certain things rather than spending the time to evaluate them. And there are other acts for which, while you can think of a situation in which you might be able to construct a fanciful situation where it's not wrong, those situations don't really exist in reality. And when we're talking about morality and evaluations, we are always speaking in generalities. We're not saying that there's a moral absolute that applies to all situations. I advocate for moral absolutes within a situation, because within any given situation, there's a finite set of actions. And within that situation, you can compare the results of those actions and determine that some set of one or more actions within that context represent the best possible actions, even if we don't necessarily know what they are. And that given that situation, some other set of actions represent the worst possible actions. But that's absolutes within a specific, with all the factors accounted for and the specific situation. I'm not advocating for moral absolutes that are universal and apply to all situations.
I think I probably missed a little bit of that, but
Okay, well, I mean, you
So-
can continue.
so I know it's a hypothetical, but in this hypothetical, would that be wrong, or would we adjust our definition to include the possible murder of someone that doesn't cause suffering? Would we include that in our definition of wrong, or would we
So first
say
of
that
all,
it wouldn't be wrong?
murder is a legal definition.
Yeah.
It is specifically defined as an unlawful killing. And so the type of situation you're constructing where killing someone may not necessarily be wrong would probably fall under the lawful killing, which would then make it not murder. So, I mean, just to get the words that might confuse the situation out of the way, the fact that you can think of a scenario where killing another human being isn't something that you or perhaps anybody would consider to be wrong doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's wrong in almost every other situation.
I mean, I can agree to that. I mean, like, I don't think people should go around murdering each other, but
Good.
I don't know. I can think of a scenario in which it's not going to cause any suffering at all,
Well,
and that it has nothing to do with the law. You know, whether it's legal or illegal. I'm trying to, because I know the law isn't necessarily moral all the time.
So I'm wondering kind of what situation you're conceiving of, so that maybe we can get a better grasp on it. Because, you know, I am a huge proponent of death with dignity and people's right to die. And so I could see a situation where you have killed somebody where this is actually what they want and it eased suffering and all of that, setting aside whether or not society considers it murder or immoral. I'm just kind of wondering, what's the scenario you're getting at, and what's the problem? Maybe it's that we're agreeing too much.
yeah.
I could think of a scenario in which this person doesn't have any family, so their death isn't going to cause any suffering to their family, and I can conceive of their death not being the dying process not being one where it was painful. So if it was some homeless guy that had no family and you shoot him in the back of the head, there's no suffering
Okay, so
that happens because of that.
Still wrong.
yeah, you're oversimplifying with this idea of suffering,
Yeah.
because
That might be it.
you've ended this person's existence against their will, right? In your scenario. So one of the things that's problematic is that we're very often short-sighted. We are prone to seeing the benefits to us and weighing them far greater than the harm done to others. And this idea of suffering or avoiding suffering isn't the only factor. When you talk about morality in terms of well-being, you have taken an action that ended this person. It's directly in conflict with this homeless person's well-being for you to shoot them. So just because you've made it painless and picked somebody who you think nobody will miss, that person's life is still over. Their well-being has been eliminated. So I don't know how you could get to calling that moral.
Well, I wouldn't call it moral, but I wouldn't have called it. It would base. It is based on my definition of wrong was very much based on suffering. So that's why this would be given my definition.
Sure. So by adding in suffering and oversimplifying the negative side,
Yeah.
it seems to me you've made a big mistake, because if you instead look at it as what actually encourages or improves well-being or maintains well-being versus what is detrimental to well-being, that's all you need. You don't need to worry about the suffering aspect, because suffering is already included in the set of things that diminish well-being. If you're suffering more, then your well-being has been diminished. And so it seems like you're picking only one component of diminishing well-being and using that as the standard for what's immoral. And I think that's a mistake, which is kind of obvious in your example.
Wait, could you say that again?
So
I didn't get it.
when evaluating the morality of something, if you begin with a foundation of well-being, you don't need to add in suffering, because if it improves or maintains well-being, then generally you would look at that as a moral action or something that's not immoral, and you would define immoral actions or wrong actions as those which diminish well-being. Whether they cause discrete suffering or not, if it diminishes well-being, then that's where we would say this is not moral or this is immoral. And so the fact that you can construct a scenario where you can't identify any suffering doesn't mean that your action changes, the valuation of your action changes. So suffering is a component of well-being, but you've got an inequity. So you're saying that things are moral if they promote well-being, and they're immoral if they cause suffering. But there are other aspects that would diminish well-being that may not include suffering.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying.
Cool.
So, one of the things that I watched was, do you know who Shelley Kagan is?
Yes.
Yes.
I've actually got her book sitting on my piano bench right now, or one of them. Or no, Shelley. Sorry, I was thinking of somebody else. It's a he, and yes, I know who Shelley Kagan is.
Well, I was listening to his lectures on Is Death Bad for You? And, so what generally what I'm kind of hearing of what you're saying is something along the lines of the deprivation account of like existing in a world where you have more pleasures than pain is good. Like if you end it, then you're not going to have that experience and enjoy it, right? Or am I misreading this?
Well, kind of. I mean, when I talk about how we oversimplify things, and you can't see the full consequences of your actions.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. I would never take it into my own hands to try to go kill some homeless guy to try to make his suffering end or whatever, because I don't know. I don't have that ability. But I was just saying I could conceive of a scenario where it doesn't cause suffering, and if
I don't
the
see why that's
definition
relevant.
includes suffering only, then it would be a problem.
So let me give you an example in the case of a cancer patient. Okay, so the cancer patient goes in, gets a diagnosis. It turns out that it's aggressive and they don't have that long to live. But if they take the chemo, it'll buy them a few more months. So the cancer patient agrees to undergo chemotherapy knowing that there's a certain amount of suffering associated with chemotherapy. Is it wrong for the doctor to administer chemotherapy knowing that it will cause this patient pain and suffering? And I would say, is it wrong?
Is it wrong to administer the chemotherapy?
Correct.
To save their life?
Well, it's not even going to save their life. It's just going to buy them a few more months.
Is it wrong to do that?
Right. Or correct. That's the question.
It's about oversimplifying suffering. You could
Right.
take and say, hey, is it wrong for me to take a knife and cut your throat? And that causes suffering. And the intuitive response is, yes, that's wrong, but what if I'm giving you an emergency tracheotomy?
Right.
So you can't simplify things as far as you'd like to.
And so that's the point of this. I mean, if the patient wants the chemotherapy, understanding that there's going to be a certain amount of suffering associated with that, then it's not wrong to administer the chemotherapy.
It'd be wrong to deny it.
Right. Now, let's say this same cancer patient, a year later or whatever, is on their deathbed, okay? They have a few days left to live at most, and the doctor comes in and you're the family member and they're asking you, because the patient has given you the responsibility for deciding what to do at the very end here. This patient is in a lot of pain, and the doctor says, look, we can put this patient on a morphine drip and end the pain. However, it will shorten the patient's life. By how much, we don't know, but it will, administering this much pain relief will shorten their life somewhat. The patient has already expressed a desire not to be in excruciating pain at the end. So is it wrong to administer the morphine and almost certainly shorten that patient's life? Or would it be wrong to withhold the pain medication? Because administering the pain medication will probably shorten the patient's life.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where you have to decide whether you want to live long, and it's up to you whether you want to live a long and somewhat happy life, or to a very short and very happy life. It's up to the individual to make that.
And this is the whole point that Jen's getting to, is that in her scenarios, what you're essentially evaluating is well-being.
Right.
And a factor of well-being is personal autonomy and making decisions about one's life. And when you add in this component of suffering, which can be a factor of well-being, but not all, the fact that there's some suffering doesn't mean that you've necessarily diminished well-being. You might have actually improved it overall, short-term suffering versus long-term, et cetera. So it's basically just another way of saying that when you're doing this, if you try to get to suffering and avoiding suffering, you've already narrowed the field more than you probably should. And while people can complain that well-being is ill-defined, that's fine, because that's what we're working on. The whole process of secular morality is not only about getting better, but about getting better at getting better. And that's to gain a better understanding of how to evaluate well-being. Where does the individual's views about their well-being fit in? How do we settle the conflict between what's in my interest of my well-being versus society's well-being? Those are all things that, there's a lot of hard work and heavy lifting to sort out. And I think that trying to simplify it, as Peter Singer and other might do with regard to suffering, is the same sort of mistake that religions are making when they're trying to simplify it, because to a Christian, morality is defined as that which is in accordance with the mind and will of God, which is a useless definition. And by the way, a quick apology to Dr. Kagan. I watched a lecture from him probably 2 weeks ago, and I also have Susan Hack, or Hawk, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, her philosophy book, where she's basically advocating for found-herentism, and it all happened at the same time, so I confused the two, but yes. I tell you what, though, Eric, so feel free to email tv@atheist-community.org, or contact us in some other way, or call back on another week as we think more about these subjects and everything else. But we're going to move on to some other callers.
Okay. It's nice talking to you.
Thanks.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thanks.
All right, bye.